What happened to a company that used to be the clear leader in cell phones, but now only has a name used in the past tense, and, well, in memes? With a tornado of wasted chances, inflexible leadership, and terrible judgments, Nokia's empire did not simply fall apart. Instead, it came to an end. So were they arrogant? Or did they just have bad luck? Did they fail to recognize the transformation brought about by smartphones, or were they too proud to make a change? Let's just say that the list is long, and we are here to break it down piece by piece. Be sure to listen closely, because this is not your typical business failure. It's a lesson for the rest. Nokia was not just a leader in the sector, but also a legend in the past. In fact, Nokia dominated the mobile phone market from the late 1990s to the early 2000s. Remember the Nokia 3310? It was more than just a phone, it was a symbol. In fact, people joked that it would be able to live even if it were thrown out of a building. But Nokia's greatest asset was also its greatest weakness. They constructed mobile devices that were nearly indestructible, but they had no idea that their market share would not be as high as they had anticipated. And although the corporation was known for its inventiveness, boredom was creeping in behind the scenes. Nokia was happy about its wins, but the tech world was getting ready for a big change that, obviously, Nokia didn't see coming. They clung to hardware and ignored the winds of change, which were blowing in the direction of software. And if that wasn't enough poor performance, Nokia was also ignoring something that was happening. See, even though Nokia had established its empire on reliable phones, this was the period in which software, and not hardware, would be the dominant force. But, as they say, once you start living in a bubble, there's nothing anyone can do to bring you out of it, unless, of course, you want to. Remember when the mobile world underwent a revolution in 2007? A brand new iPhone was introduced by Apple, and all of a sudden, mobile phones turned into mini-computers, pocket-sized gateways to a new digital universe. They were also no longer merely used for making phone calls or sending texts. But what did Nokia do? Well, Nokia tossed its shoulders in response to Apple's breakthrough, while the rest of the technology world gasped. And even though the iPhone was indeed amazing, with its classic ringtone and stunning features, Nokia believed that it was nothing more than a gizmo designed for a specific market segment. Scoffing, they asked, who would want a phone that didn't have any buttons? Obviously, Nokia had their treasured Symbian operating system, and they were confident that it would continue to be successful until it wasn't wanted anymore. And so, because arrogance comes at a heavy cost, those in charge of Nokia were warned by their own employees that touchscreens and applications were the way of the future. Despite this, they clung to Symbian as if it were a life raft in the middle of a downpour. So that raft was riddled with holes, and the storm was only getting worse until it was over. Not only did Nokia take a while to adjust, but they flatly refused. They believed that their market supremacy would shield them from the iPhone. But they were going to have to face the harsh reality that technology never sleeps. Naturally, almost as if the iPhone was not enough of a warning, Android, which is an open-source mobile operating system, appeared on the market and quickly became the dominant player. Consumers were suddenly presented with a variety of options when manufacturers all over the world hopped on the Android bandwagon. They also have strong software on their reasonably priced, customizable phones. Generally, Nokia should have been alarmed by Android's quick rise, but instead, they pushed harder for Symbian. Obviously, it used to operate so perfectly. Why modify it now, right? Essentially, the leadership of Nokia continued to believe that the company could be saved by fan loyalty to the brand and rock-solid hardware. Still, the landscape of consumer technology had shifted, and Nokia was completely unaware of how out of touch they were. Not to mention, Nokia phones appeared outdated by 2010. Not only was the market changing, it had outpaced them. Once thought of as a dinosaur, the once dominant Nokia was now seen as clinging to a dinosaur habitat. Nokia's name was linked with innovation. Now enter the controversial 2011 alliance with Microsoft, an action that would rank among the worst business choices ever made by a computer company. By then, Nokia needed a miracle, having watched their market share drop to virtually nothing. So they made a deal with Microsoft to switch from Symbian to the Windows Phone OS. Obviously, we all know how that went. Yet Microsoft's operating system wasn't fully developed yet. Its functionality lagged much behind that of Android and iOS, and its app store was dreadful. Even worse, people who had supported Nokia through thick and thin also disliked it. Obviously, Windows phones were not something they wanted. They wanted Nokia to develop something new or join the Android movement. Still, the transaction was finalized, and Nokia was now destined to be a sinking ship. And the kingdom, which used to be very powerful, gave up its crown for a system that no one wanted. The CEO now knows the ship is sinking, but nobody is paying him or her any attention. The result? Stephen Elop was Nokia's CEO at the time, and sent the now famous burning platform letter. He obviously didn't find it funny, as Nokia was under great risk and would die rather a terrible death without change. The words were strong naturally, but it was already far too late. By then, Nokia's corporate culture had become a disorganized mess of egos, bureaucracy, and a dread of risk-taking. Now, even though the memo was very honest, it showed how slow the company had been to move. We all know that Nokia had a problem with its culture. First one, the typical red tape slowed down leadership and stopped new ideas from happening. Superiors weren't listening to the engineers who were suggesting new ideas. Secondly, Nokia cared more about preserving its history than making plans for the future, and its unwillingness to change was the last straw that killed it. As of the year 2013, the signs were clearly visible. For $7.2 billion, Nokia sold its phone business to Microsoft. Of course, it wasn't a happy union. It was a funeral march. After being a leader in its field, Nokia had become a corporate disaster, and the sale to Microsoft felt like a last desperate attempt to get some air. From there onwards, it didn't work when Microsoft tried to add Nokia phones to their environment. By 2016, Microsoft had effectively assumed that the entire Nokia investment was a loss and had written it off. Windows phones were made useless in the mobile world, and Nokia's legacy was reduced to the status of a footnote in the pages of technological history. In the past, they had also been a source of inspiration for both devotion and creativity. Yet at this point, they were little more than a story. This is a story about arrogance, wasted chances, and a pattern of mistakes that ultimately resulted in the collapse of a godly empire.